Officer Jake Riley considered himself a man of logic and order, a necessary trait for a K-9 officer in the tight-knit but often turbulent community of Oak Haven. His partner, a magnificent German shepherd named Rex, was the embodiment of those very qualities: disciplined, perceptive, and utterly fearless. Together, they were a formidable force, a blur of coordinated precision when tracking a suspect or securing a scene. Rex's intelligence was uncanny, his loyalty absolute. He'd faced down armed assailants, navigated treacherous terrain, and remained steadfast through the chaos of active crime scenes without so much as a tremor. He was, in every sense. Jake's other half, which made his behavior concerning the Oak Haven Bridge all the more perplexing, and, frankly, infuriating. For 2 years, 730 days, give or take a patrol, Rex had stubbornly, inexplicably refused to set a single paw on the old, stone-arched bridge. It wasn't just a slight hesitation, it was a full-blown, unshakable phobia. As they approached, Rex's ears would flatten. A low, guttural growl would rumble in his chest, and he'd dig his paws into the asphalt, pulling against his leash with all his formidable strength. His normally bright, intelligent eyes would dart towards the murky waters of the Oak Haven River flowing beneath, a look of profound unease settling upon his usually stoic face. Jake had tried everything: gentle coaxing, firm commands, even carrying the 100-pound dog a few feet onto the bridge, only for Rex to writhe and whimper, a sound Jake had never heard from him before. Until he was put back on solid ground, vets had found nothing physically wrong. Trainers, even those specializing in K-9 behavior, were baffled. Some kind of conditioned fear, one suggested, or perhaps a past trauma you're unaware of. But Rex had been with Jake since he was a pup. An open book of canine devotion. There were no hidden traumas, no bad experiences that could explain this singular, crippling fear. The Oak Haven Bridge itself was harmless enough. A picturesque, albeit aging, structure that connected the older, quieter part of town with the bustling main street. Locals used it daily, oblivious to the silent drama that played out whenever Jake and Rex's patrol route brought them near. Jake, a rational man, tried to rationalize it, a peculiar echo, a specific vibration only Rex could detect. But deep down, a seed of something else, something less logical, had begun to sprout. It wasn't just fear Jake saw in Rex's eyes, it was something akin to recognition, a profound, almost sorrowful understanding of a secret the bridge held, a secret that only Rex seemed privy to, and it was driving Jake slowly, steadily, insane. Jake's attempts to unravel Rex's bridge aversion quickly became an obsession. He'd meticulously reviewed every training session, every incident report, searching for a forgotten moment, a missed cue that could explain the inexplicable. He'd even set up hidden cameras near the bridge, hoping to catch some subtle trigger a particular car, a unique sound, but the footage yielded nothing but the usual daily rhythms of Oak Haven. Rex's fear was an isolated anomaly, a singular crack in the otherwise perfect foundation of their partnership. His colleagues, initially sympathetic, had begun to gently mock him. Maybe Rex just hates that shade of gray. Jake, Officer Miller had quipped one morning. Earning a round of chuckles in the briefing room, Jake would force a smile, but the joke stung. It wasn't just a quirky habit, it was a fundamental disconnect between him and his most trusted ally. And it gnawed at him. It was during one of these solitary, frustrating patrols that Jake found himself lingering near the local diner, nursing a lukewarm coffee. He overheard snippets of conversation, as he often did in a town where gossip flowed as freely as the Oak Haven River itself. And the river, along with its bridge, was a surprisingly frequent topic. Not about Rex, of course, but about the old stories, Heard they're still finding things in the riverbed from that night? A woman whispered. Her voice hushed. Don't talk about it, her companion retorted, glancing nervously around. Some things are best left buried. Jake had heard these whispers before. Oakhaven, like many old towns, had its share of local legends, its own ghosts. The Oakhaven Bridge, in particular, seemed to be a magnet for them. There were tales of a young couple who'd vanished decades ago, their car found abandoned near the bridge. Another, more persistent rumor spoke of a local eccentric, a recluse named Silas Blackwood, who had disappeared without a trace almost 15 years prior. Silas was a known environmental activist, often clashing with the powerful, old money families who owned most of the land bordering the river, particularly the notorious Caldwell Corporation, whose chemical plant sat just a few miles upstream. The official ruling had been accidental drowning, a tragic end for a man who often spent his days by the river, but many in Oakhaven, especially the older generation, whispered of foul play, of secrets swallowed by the murky depths. Jake, a man of facts and evidence, had always dismissed these as mere folklore, the kind of dramatic embellishment small towns clung to for excitement. The police files on Silas Blackwood's disappearance were thin, inconclusive. No body, no concrete evidence of anything untoward. Just a lot of speculation, yet. As he listened to the hushed tones, the averted gazes, a sliver of unease pricked at him. He glanced out the diner window, his eyes drawn to the distant arch of the Oakhaven Bridge, almost invisible through the morning mist. He thought of Rex, the unyielding rigidity of his stance, the sorrowful depths of his gaze towards the water. Could a dog, even one as exceptional as Rex, be reacting to something more than just a perceived threat? Could he be sensing a lingering echo of the town's untold sorrows? A memory preserved not in history books, but in the very currents of the river itself. The idea was preposterous, yet it refused to be entirely dismissed. It subtly planted a seed of doubt, a nascent curiosity that began to intertwine with his frustration. Jake's own past was a meticulously constructed fortress, built brick by painful brick to keep certain memories at bay. He rarely spoke of his younger sister. Sarah, she had disappeared a decade ago, a bright, spirited teenager, seemingly swallowed by the vast, indifferent wilderness bordering their childhood home. The official search had been exhaustive, the hope dwindling with each passing day, until, finally, the case went cold, officially declared a probable runaway. Though Jake, even then, knew it was a lie. Sarah wouldn't have left a note, a word, a single sign for her family. He'd lived with the gnawing uncertainty, the phantom ache of betrayal, the sense of a truth hidden just out of reach. For years, this unspoken trauma, this personal shadow, made Rex's peculiar aversion to the Oakhaven Bridge resonate with him on a deeply personal level. He saw in Rex's agitated stance not just an animal's fear, but a reflection of his own persistent, irrational conviction that some secrets refused to stay buried. He knew what it felt like to have an instinct, a gut feeling, screaming at him that something was profoundly wrong, even when all the official reports, all the logical explanations, pointed elsewhere. One drizzly afternoon, Jake found himself sitting on a cold park bench overlooking the very river Rex so vehemently avoided. Rex, tethered beside him, whined softly, his nose twitching, his gaze fixed on the murky water. Jake reached down, stroking the dog's head, feeling the warmth of his fur, the steady beat of his heart. "What is it, boy?" he murmured, his voice low. "What do you see that I don't?" He thought about Sarah. He thought about the police. Well-meaning, but ultimately helpless. The case files growing dusty in a forgotten cabinet. He thought about the community, quick to move on, to accept the official narrative. He realized then that his empathy for Rex wasn't merely about a canine partner's unusual behavior. It was about a shared experience of confronting an invisible wall, a truth that refused to reveal itself. Rex, in his own way, was confronting his own hidden injustice. A silent plea for understanding that only Jake seemed to hear. This realization shifted something within Jake. His approach to Rex's problem slowly began to change. It was no longer just about fixing a behavioral issue at Tubiani. It was about honoring Rex's intuition, about listening to the silent language of a creature whose senses often far surpassed his own. He started spending more time near the bridge, not just patrolling, but observing. He'd sit on the riverbank, sketching the currents, noting the shifting patterns of debris. He'd watch Rex, not as a handler correcting a flaw, but as a student learning from a master. He noticed the subtle nuances in Rex's reactions. It wasn't just the bridge itself, he realized, but the water directly beneath it that seemed to be the focal point of Rex's distress. The dog would pull harder, bark with more urgency, when the current beneath the central arch was particularly strong, or when the light hit the water at a certain angle. Revealing unseen depths. It was as if Rex was trying to tell him, not about what was on the bridge, but what lay beneath it. The old man, who sometimes fished near the bridge, would occasionally nod to Jake, a knowing look in his rheumy eyes. He never approached, never offered advice directly, but his presence, his quiet understanding of the river's moods, somehow validated Jake's growing conviction. The world had dismissed Sarah's disappearance as a runaway. It had dismissed Silas Blackwood's as an accident. But Jake, through Rex, was learning to listen to the whispers of forgotten things, to the echoes of injustice that sometimes lingered long after the events themselves had faded from human memory. This quiet, shared struggle cemented a bond between man and dog that transcended the professional. It became a partnership forged in the shadows of unspoken truths. The old man was a fixture of the Oakhaven riverbank, as much a part of the landscape as the gnarled willow trees that dipped their branches into the murky water. His name was Elias Thorne, though most just called him Old Man Thorne. He was a man made of quiet observation and sun-weathered wisdom. His face a roadmap of fine lines, his eyes the color of the river on a cloudy day, deep, knowing, and a little opaque. He spent his days fishing, not for sport, but with a patient, almost ritualistic dedication, his ancient tackle box by his side, a thermos of tea perpetually steaming. Jake had seen him countless times on his patrols, a silent figure by the water's edge. Rex, remarkably, never barked at him, never showed the usual canine suspicion. Instead, when they passed, Rex would sometimes offer a low, soft whine, almost a greeting, and Elias would simply nod, a subtle acknowledgement that passed between man and dog. It was after one particularly frustrating attempt to get Rex near the bridge, an attempt that ended with Rex trembling and pulling so violently that Jake feared he'd dislocate his shoulder, that Jake finally approached Elias. The old man was reeling in a line, his movements slow and deliberate. "Morning, Elias," Jake offered, trying to sound casual, despite the churning frustration within him. Elias grunted, a sound that could have meant anything. He didn't look up immediately, his gaze fixed on the water. "Morning, officer. Your dog seems particularly agitated today," Jake sighed, running a hand over Rex's tense back. "You could say that. He still won't go near that bridge." 2 years. Elias, it's baffling. Elias finally looked up, his eyes meeting Jake's. There was no judgment, only a deep, unsettling understanding. "Some things," he began, his voice raspy, like pebbles shifting in a current. "The river remembers, and some things. The river holds," Jake blinked. "Remembers what holds, what I..." He tried to keep the skepticism from his voice, but it was a losing battle. He was a cop, not a mystic. Elias chuckled, a dry, rustling sound. Secrets, officer. Always secrets. The river. She's seen more than any living soul in this town. Murders, drownings, things taken and things hidden. He paused, casting a glance towards the bridge, a shadow passing over his face. That bridge, it's a silent witness. But the river, she's the keeper of the ledger. He turned back to his fishing line, adjusting the bait with practiced ease. That dog of yours, he continued, his voice softer. He hears the whispers, feels the cold spots, knows what's not right. Jake scoffed. A nervous laugh. He's a K9, Elias. He tracks scents, finds evidence. He doesn't commune with ghosts. No, Elias agreed. Surprisingly calm. But he senses what's out of place. What doesn't belong? He smells the lingering stain of injustice. He used the word injustice with a quiet gravitas that made Jake's blood run cold. It echoed his own hidden pain, his sister's unanswered questions. Unanswered. You speak as if you know something. Jake pressed, his curiosity finally outweighing his skepticism. About the bridge. Or the river. Elias picked up his thermos, taking a slow sip. I've fished these waters for 70 years. Officer, I've seen the tides change. The banks erode. I've seen the river give up its offerings, and I've seen it swallow things whole. He looked at Jake directly, his gaze piercing. Young Silas Blackwood, for instance. A good man. Too good for some folk in this town. And he disappeared. Didn't he right near that bridge? The river said he drowned. But the river often lies, or it's forced to. A chill, unrelated to the damp air, snaked up Jake's spine. Silas Blackwood, the name from the diner conversation. The cold case. He'd dismissed it as an old tale, but Elias spoke of it with an intimacy that felt disturbingly real. You think he didn't just drown? Elias smiled, a faint, melancholic expression. I think the river often keeps silent when powerful men tell it to, but even the river has its limits. And sometimes, it needs a little help to speak its truth. He patted Rex's head gently, a gesture Rex accepted without flinching. Your partner here, Elias said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. He's trying to help the river speak. You just gotta learn to listen. Officer, with that. Elias reeled in his line, a small silver fish wriggling at the end. He unhooked it. Then, instead of putting it in his bucket, gently released it back into the water. Some things, he murmured, watching the fish disappear, deserve to be free. He then packed up his gear, leaving Jake standing there, the scent of damp earth and old river water clinging to the air. Rex still gazing fixedly at the churning water beneath the Oakhaven Bridge. Elias's cryptic warnings, initially dismissed, now echoed in Jake's mind, planting an undeniable seed of doubt about the official narratives and igniting a potent, unsettling curiosity. Elias Thorne's words, delivered with such quiet conviction, had a profound impact on Jake. They gnawed at him, undermining the logical frameworks he'd always relied upon. The old man hadn't just spoken of local gossip, he'd spoken of injustice, of powerful men, and of the river being forced to lie. These were not the ramblings of a senile fisherman. They were the observations of a man who had lived and breathed the river's secrets for decades. Jake began to adjust their patrol routes, making deliberate detours towards the Oakhaven Bridge. It wasn't just about getting Rex to cross anymore. It was about understanding why he wouldn't. He started conducting what he privately called sensory patrols, trying to experience the bridge and the river through Rex's heightened perceptions. He'd stand for long minutes, eyes closed, listening, the constant rush of the water, The creak of the old bridge timbers, the distant hum of traffic, nothing immediately stood out to his human ears. But Rex's reactions were consistently pronounced whenever they approached the central span. His nose would work furiously, pulling at the air, and his agitated whines would intensify, directed not at the bridge itself, but clearly towards the churning water below. One evening, under a sliver of moon, Jake watched Rex's head snap towards a particular eddy, a swirling pocket of water near the far bank. The dog let out a sharp, guttural bark. Unlike his usual warning barks, this was raw, almost desperate. Jake scanned the river. There was nothing visible, just the dark, shifting surface. Yet, Rex continued to stare at that specific spot, his body rigid with attention that Jake had never seen him exhibit. Even in the most dangerous police operations, another time, during a surprisingly warm autumn afternoon, a faint, almost imperceptible scent wafted up from the river. To Jake, it was just the usual damp, earthy smell of the river. But Rex suddenly reared back, his hackles rising, a deep, unsettling growl vibrating in his chest. He pulled Jake furiously towards the bank, his powerful body straining, trying to get closer to the water as if compelled by an invisible force. Jake fought to hold him back, feeling the raw power in Rex's muscles. He could not identify the scent that so distressed his partner, but it was clear that it was potent, evoking a profound, primal reaction from the usually composed K9. These incidents, small and seemingly insignificant to an untrained eye, began to accumulate, forming a pattern that Jake could no longer dismiss as mere coincidence or generalized phobia. Rex wasn't just afraid of the bridge, he was reacting to something in or from the river, something specific to the area directly beneath the bridge. It was as if Rex was trying to point out a location, to highlight a persistent presence that only his superior senses could detect. Jake started carrying a small notebook, jotting down every detail of the time of day, the weather conditions, the exact spot where Rex reacted most strongly, the specific nature of his distress. He noted the peculiar current patterns Elias had hinted at, strange eddies that seemed to appear and disappear without rhyme or reason, patches of still water that seemed unnaturally calm amidst the flow. He even began to notice subtle shifts in the water's color, an almost imperceptible murkiness at certain times. Unlike the rest of the river, he considered bringing a dive team in, but without concrete evidence. It would be an expensive and highly speculative endeavor, likely to be dismissed by his superiors as a waste of resources based on a dog's intuition. He needed more. He needed something tangible, something that would give credence to Rex's silent plea. His personal mission became inextricably linked to his grief for Sarah. He understood Rex's frustration, the burden of knowing a truth that others couldn't see or wouldn't believe. It fueled his determination. If Rex was sensing an injustice, a hidden secret, then Jake, armed with his partner's unwavering conviction, would be the one to uncover it. The river might have been forced to keep silent for years, but Jake knew, with growing certainty, that its time for confession was drawing near, and Rex was its most potent, most eloquent witness. The old bridge, once a symbol of an irrational fear, was slowly transforming into a monument to a long-buried secret. Waiting to be unveiled, the air hung heavy and humid over Oakhaven, a prelude to a summer storm. Jake and Rex were on their usual patrol, the distant rumble of thunder echoing the unease that had become a constant companion for Jake. As they approached the Oakhaven Bridge, Rex's usual agitated whines escalated into something more primal. His body stiffened, his fur bristled along his spine, and he began to emit a series of sharp, distressed barks, not aggressive, but a frantic, urgent sound Jake rarely heard from him. "What is it?" "Boy," Jake murmured. Tightening his grip on the leash, Rex was pulling with all his considerable might. not away from the bridge, but towards the riverbank, straining to get closer to the churning water directly beneath the central arch. His nose was working like a frenzy, inhaling deep, ragged breaths of air as if trying to grasp an elusive scent. Then it hit Jake. A smell. Faint at first, then growing stronger as a gust of wind swept across the water. It wasn't the usual damp earth or decaying leaves. This was metallic, acrid, and strangely sweet all at once. It was a scent Jake knew, one that sent a jolt of alarm through him blood. But it was old, deeply embedded, and mingling with something else he couldn't quite place. Something chemical and unsettling. Rex's reaction intensified dramatically. He wasn't just agitated, he was frantic. He let out a piercing howl, a sound of profound distress that Jake had only heard once before. During a particularly harrowing search and rescue operation where they'd found a victim too late. Rex dug his paws into the loose earth of the riverbank, clawing at the soil, his eyes fixed on the eddy beneath the bridge, a spot where the current seemed to swirl unnaturally, creating a small, dark vortex. Jake, overwhelmed by the intensity of Rex's reaction and the pervasive, sickening odor, allowed himself to be pulled closer to the edge. He crouched down, trying to see what Rex was reacting to. The water was dark, opaque, reflecting the bruised sky, but as a larger gust of wind whipped through, disturbing the surface. Jake swore he saw something shimmer briefly in the depths of the eddy, something metallic, almost glinting, before it was swallowed by the murky current. Easy. Boy. Easy? Jake whispered, though his own heart was hammering against his ribs. This wasn't fear Rex was exhibiting. This was pure, unadulterated detection, a signal so potent it bypassed all his learned inhibitions. Rex wasn't refusing to cross the bridge out of a simple phobia. He was actively trying to investigate something beneath it. The bridge itself was merely the gateway, the overhead obstacle preventing him from reaching the source of the profound distress that had haunted him for 2 years. Jake pulled out his phone, snapping a few blurry pictures of the swirling eddy. Though he knew they wouldn't show anything conclusive, he needed more. He needed to understand what Rex was sensing. What old, buried secret was finally beginning to surface from the river's depths? The metallic, chemical smell was unlike anything he had encountered in typical missing persons cases or drownings. It hinted at something industrial, something deliberately hidden. He knew then that his superiors would scoff, that the department would be reluctant to commit resources based on a K-9's intuition and a faint smell that only he and Rex could seemingly detect. But the conviction in Rex's rigid body, the desperate urgency in his barks, was more compelling than any official report. This wasn't just a dog being stubborn. This was a highly trained K-9 trying to communicate a truth that had been silenced for too long, looking at the agitated eddy, and then at Rex's pleading eyes. Jake felt a surge of cold determination. He wouldn't just observe anymore, he would act. The river had finally begun to whisper its secret. And Rex, the silent guardian of Oakhaven Bridge, was urging him to listen. He vowed, right there on the storm-swept riverbank, that he would not rest until he unearthed whatever dark truth the Oakhaven River had reluctantly held for so long. A truth that Rex had been trying to reveal for 2 long years. The smell, the peculiar eddy, and Rex's desperate intensity had galvanized Jake. He couldn't shake the conviction that they were on the cusp of something significant. Something far beyond a simple canine phobia. He returned to the Oakhaven Police Department, but instead of filing a report about Rex's behavior, he started digging. He pulled the dusty files on Silas Blackwood's disappearance, the cold case Elias Thorne had alluded to. The official report was brief, almost dismissive: presumed drowning, no body recovered, case closed. Jake pored over the scant details. Silas Blackwood, a local environmental activist, had been last seen near the Oakhaven Bridge on a cold November evening 15 years ago. He had been vocal, fiercely critical of the Caldwell Corporation and its alleged disregard for environmental regulations concerning their chemical runoff into the Oakhaven River. His disappearance, though ruled an accident, had always felt too convenient, too neat. The file mentioned a search, but it was perfunctory, limited to the immediate vicinity, hampered by rough currents and cold weather. No dedicated dive team had ever been deployed. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. He saw Rex's frantic eyes, smelled the faint, metallic odor, and heard Elias's raspy voice. The river often lies, or it's forced to. He knew he couldn't go through official channels yet. He needed more. He needed undeniable proof to justify a full-scale investigation that would undoubtedly draw the ire of powerful figures like the Caldwells. The next morning, armed with a newfound sense of purpose, Jake called in sick. He drove to a sporting goods store in a neighboring town, far enough away to avoid local gossip, and purchased a heavy-duty, underwater camera with a long, flexible cable, typically used by fishermen to scout prime spots. He also bought a powerful, submersible flashlight. He knew it was a long shot, a desperate measure, but he had to try. Rex had shown him where to look. Now it was up to him to see what Rex had seen. He returned to the Oakhaven Bridge, parking his unmarked personal vehicle a discreet distance away. Rex, in the passenger seat, whined excitedly as they approached. Sensing Jake's renewed focus, his tail thumping against the seat, Jake chose a secluded spot on the riverbank, just downstream from the bridge, where the bank sloped gently into the water. Obscured by thick brush, he tethered Rex securely to a large tree, instructing him to stay, and the dog, sensing the gravity of the situation, obeyed. Though his eyes remained fixed on the water beneath the bridge, Jake rigged the camera. Securing the flashlight to its side with heavy-duty tape, he carefully lowered the camera into the murky water, guiding the cable towards the precise eddy where Rex had reacted so violently. The current was deceptively strong, tugging at the cable, but Jake held firm, slowly feeding it out, his heart pounding in his chest. He watched the small screen on the camera's monitor, a blurry, green-tinged view of the riverbed. He saw rocks, submerged branches, discarded trash. Nothing. He maneuvered the camera, slowly sweeping the area, feeling the weight of the water, the pull of the current, just as frustration began to set in, just as he considered giving up. A faint, unnatural glimmer caught his eye on the screen. He held his breath, inching the camera closer, adjusting the angle, and then he saw it, half buried in the silt at the deepest part of the eddy, obscured by tangled roots and river debris, was a dark, almost shapeless mass. It was too large to be a rock, too regular to be a discarded object. As he maneuvered the camera further, the powerful flashlight cutting through the gloom, a chillingly familiar pattern emerged. A faded, dark green fabric, half torn, appeared on the screen. And then, a glimpse of what looked like a belt buckle. Tarnished but distinctive, Jake felt a cold dread settle deep in his stomach. He knew, with a horrifying certainty, what he was looking at. He recognized the fabric, the buckle, from the few grainy photographs in Silas Blackwood's cold case file. The river, after 15 long years, was finally giving up its secret. And Rex, all along, had been its silent, unwavering witness. The image on the small monitor was undeniably chilling. The faded green fabric, the distinctive belt buckle. It was Silas Blackwood's jacket, or what remained of it. Tangled and half buried in the riverbed, Jake felt a cold dread, mixed with a surge of grim satisfaction. Rex had been right, all this time. The dog hadn't been afraid. He'd been trying to alert Jake to a hidden truth, a submerged injustice, He carefully retracted the camera, his hands trembling slightly. He knew this wasn't enough to simply call it in. The department, the DA, they would demand more. They'd need forensic evidence and official recovery, a proper investigation, and that meant dealing with the political fallout, the inevitable resistance from those who benefited from the long-buried secret. The name Caldwell Corporation echoed in his mind. Along with Elias Thorne's words about powerful men, Jake decided to take a calculated risk. He couldn't trust the evidence to be undisturbed if he waited. He needed to document the anomaly, the precise conditions that had kept Silas Blackwood hidden for so long. He spent the rest of the afternoon meticulously mapping the riverbed beneath the bridge, using the camera to capture multiple angles of the remains, noting the specific current patterns, the depth of the silt, the way debris collected in that particular eddy. He even collected water samples from the eddy and from other parts of the river, hoping to find a disparity, a chemical trace that might speak to foul play. What he discovered was fascinating and deeply unsettling. The eddy, a seemingly random swirl in the river's flow, was in fact a highly unusual phenomenon. It wasn't caused by natural river topography alone. Instead, it appeared to be subtly influenced by an unusual rock formation directly underneath the central pillar of the bridge. A formation that, to Jake's eye, looked almost too perfectly placed, too sharp-edged to be entirely natural. This, combined with an obscure, almost imperceptible shift in the riverbed's slope at that exact point, created a miniature, self-perpetuating vortex. Anything caught in its grasp, particularly something lightweight and buoyant enough to be carried by the current, but heavy enough to sink, would be drawn into this pocket, then held there, perpetually churned but never fully released by the river's main flow. It was a perfect, natural, yet seemingly manipulated trap, and it was located directly where Rex always stopped, directly where he directed his agitated barks. Rex wasn't just sensing the remains, he was reacting to the very mechanism that had held them captive, the unnatural currents that kept the secret hidden. Jake returned home, the camera footage carefully stored on an encrypted drive. He spent the evening poring over local maps, geological surveys of the area, and old engineering blueprints of the Oak Haven Bridge. He cross-referenced them with the notes he'd taken by the river. The unnatural rock formation he'd observed, the one influencing the eddy, wasn't on any official survey. It was as if it had appeared out of nowhere, or had been deliberately placed, but placed by whom and why, his mind raced, piecing together the fragments. Silas Blackwood, the environmental activist, disappearing near the bridge. The Caldwell Corporation, known for its powerful influence and, according to whispers, its willingness to cut corners. A perfectly designed, seemingly natural, riverine trap directly where Silas's remains were found. It was too much of a coincidence. The next morning, Jake presented his findings, not to his immediate supervisor, but directly to Captain Davies, a veteran officer known for his integrity. Albeit a healthy dose of skepticism, he laid out the geological surveys, the old blueprints, his own notes, and finally, the damning, grainy underwater footage. He explained Rex's consistent behavior, the unique scent, and the peculiar eddy. Captain Davies, a man who had seen it all, watched the footage in silence, his face, usually unreadable, slowly creased with a deepening frown. When the video ended, he sat back in his chair, a long sigh escaping him. "Jake," he said, his voice quiet, "this is a lot. You understand the implications, don't you? If this is what you think it is, we're talking about a 15-year-old murder case, covered up, involving people with very deep pockets." "I understand, Captain," Jake replied, his voice firm. "But Rex led me to it. He's been trying to tell us for 2 years. This isn't just a drowning. This is a crime. And the river gave it up. Captain Davies looked at the map, then back at the screen. He picked up the phone, his decision made. Get me Detective Miller from Cold Cases, and prepare a request for a specialized underwater recovery team. We're going to dive the Oakhaven River and Jake, he added, looking at Rex, who had been lying patiently by Jake's feet, now lifting his head. Make sure your partner is there. He seems to be the only one who truly knows this river's secrets. The captain's words, though heavy with the weight of the task ahead, filled Jake with a profound sense of vindication. Rex's silent, persistent vigil had finally broken through. The river, a reluctant accomplice to a decades-old deception, was about to be forced to confess its truth. Thanks to a K-9's unwavering intuition, the reopening of the Silas Blackwood cold case sent ripples through Oakhaven, a town that preferred its secrets to remain quietly buried. Detective Miller, a grizzled veteran with a reputation for tenacity, arrived from the cold case unit, his skepticism palpable. He'd seen countless false leads, desperate theories, but Captain Davies's unusual insistence, coupled with Jake's calm, detailed account and the undeniable evidence of Rex's long-standing behavior, held his attention. The day of the official dive beneath the Oakhaven Bridge was fraught with tension. A small crowd had gathered on the banks, drawn by the presence of police vehicles, a flat-bottomed recovery boat, and the unmistakable sight of divers in wetsuits. Among them was Elias Thorne, standing a little apart, his gaze fixed on the murky water with an almost prophetic solemnity. Jake stood on the bridge, Rex beside him, both watching the dive team prepare. Rex, remarkably, was calm now. The frantic energy that usually consumed him near the bridge was gone, replaced by a quiet, focused intensity. He seemed to understand that the moment of truth was at hand, that his silent plea was finally being heard. The dive supervisor, a no-nonsense woman named Sergeant Eva Rostova, was efficient and professional. "All right, Officer Riley," she said, her voice crisp. "Show us the exact spot." Jake pointed, his arm steady. "Right there, Sergeant. About 20 feet down, in that eddy. Rex led me to it." He braced himself for the inevitable eye roll, but Rostova merely nodded, her expression unreadable. She'd heard stranger things in her line of work. The divers slipped into the water, their lights cutting through the opaque green. Minutes stretched into an agonizing silence, broken only by the hum of the boat's engine and the distant cries of gulls. Jake's heart hammered against his ribs. What if he was wrong? What if the current had shifted the remains? Or if the initial glimpse was just a trick of the light? Then, over the comms, came a muffled voice. "Sergeant, we have something, looks like fabric and bone. It's heavily silted." A collective gasp went through the small crowd on the bank. Elias Thorne closed his eyes briefly, a flicker of something like grim triumph crossing his face. The recovery process was slow, painstaking. The eddy, as Jake had observed, was a difficult area to navigate. But eventually, a body bag, heavy and sodden, was carefully winched from the depths. It was unmistakable. The outline of human remains, entangled with decaying fabric. The forensic team moved in, their faces grim. Initial examination on the bank confirmed it. The remnants of a faded green jacket, a distinctive belt buckle. It was Silas Blackwood, but it wasn't just a body. As the forensics expert, Dr. Eris carefully began to examine the remains, her expression shifted from professional detachment to one of grave concern. "Officer Riley," she called out, her voice tight. "There's something here not consistent with a simple drowning." She pointed to a section of the skeletal remains, partially obscured by clinging mud. "See this clean break? Tibia and fibula? Consistent with a powerful blunt force trauma. And here," she added, pointing to a small, almost imperceptible discoloration on what appeared to be a rib bone. This is highly unusual. It looks like chemical erosion. Jake's blood ran cold. Blunt force trauma. Chemical erosion. This wasn't an accident. This was murder. And the strange, acrid smell Rex had detected? The one Jake couldn't quite place. It made horrifying sense now. Detective Miller, who had approached. His skepticism now completely replaced by a grim resolve, squatted beside the remains. Blunt force trauma? That means he was likely incapacitated before he entered the water, or struck immediately upon falling in, and chemical erosion. That points a very specific finger, doesn't it? His eyes flicked towards the distant smokestacks of the Caldwell Corporation plant visible on the horizon. The discovery transformed the cold case from a missing persons file into an active murder investigation. The small town was abuzz. The Caldwell Corporation, long considered untouchable, was suddenly under scrutiny. Jake, once dismissed for listening to his dog, was now the hero. His intuition validated in the most chilling way possible. Rex, sitting calmly beside him, seemed to observe the scene with a quiet understanding, as if acknowledging that his mission was finally complete. The river had held its secret for 15 years, but with a loyal K-9's unwavering persistence and an officer's willingness to listen. The truth had finally emerged from the murky depths. The discovery of Silas Blackwood's remains, combined with the forensic findings of blunt force trauma and chemical erosion, blew the cold case wide open, transforming it from a forgotten file into a full-blown murder investigation. The small, close-knit community of Oakhaven, which had long whispered about Silas's disappearance, was now reeling from the stark reality of foul play. The initial police reports, which had conveniently closed the case as an accidental drowning, were now under intense scrutiny. Jake, once the eccentric officer with the phobic dog, was now at the heart of the resurrected investigation. His every observation and theory meticulously re-evaluated, Detective Miller, with his sharp, experienced eye, immediately took charge. His first move was to re-interview everyone even tangentially connected to Silas Blackwood. This included former colleagues from the environmental activist groups, old friends, and, most importantly, the key players from the Caldwell Corporation. The powerful entity Silas had been actively protesting against before his disappearance. The Caldwells were Oakhaven's silent rulers. Their chemical plant, situated a few miles upstream from the Oakhaven Bridge, was the town's largest employer, and their family name was synonymous with wealth and influence. Mr. Thomas Caldwell Sr., the patriarch, was a formidable figure, known for his ruthless business acumen and his impenetrable network of local connections. His son, Robert Caldwell, ran the day-to-day operations, a man with a veneer of charm that barely concealed a cold. Calculating ambition, Jake and Miller began with the plant manager, a nervous, sweating man named Arthur Finch. He claimed to remember nothing unusual about the time of Silas's disappearance, feigning shock at the murder revelation, but under Miller's relentless questioning, Finch's composure began to fray. He kept glancing at his watch, his eyes darting towards the door, as if expecting someone to rescue him. "Mr. Finch," Miller pressed, his voice deceptively soft. Silas Blackwood was publicly accusing Caldwell Corp of illegal dumping. He had documentation, witnesses. He was a thorn in your side, and then he vanished. Coincidence? Finch stammered, denying everything. Silas was a troublemaker, delusional. We handled everything by the book. By the book, Jake interjected, his voice sharp. My forensics team found traces of a highly corrosive industrial chemical on Silas Blackwood's remains. A chemical, Mr. Finch. That is a known byproduct of your plant-specific manufacturing process, and it was found in a unique eddy beneath the Oakhaven Bridge, a spot where my K-9 partner, Rex, has been trying to tell us something for 2 years. The mention of the chemical clearly rattled Finch. He visibly paled, his eyes widening. That's impossible. We filter everything we have permits. As they left Finch's office, Miller leaned into Jake. He knows something. He's terrified, but he's not the one who struck the blow. He's covering for someone higher up. Their investigation led them to old news articles, long-forgotten whispers from former Caldwell employees, and even a disgruntled ex-police officer who had been on duty when Silas first disappeared. This ex-officer, now retired and living quietly out of state, revealed a crucial detail: he had been pressured by a senior department official, allegedly at the behest of the Caldwells, to downplay the initial investigation, to categorize Silas's disappearance as a probable drowning, and to avoid any in-depth search of the river. The implication was clear: the local authorities had been compromised. The investigation deliberately stifled to protect powerful interests. Jake recalled Elias Thorne's cryptic words about the river being forced to lie. It wasn't just the river that had been forced, it was the entire system. The more they dug, the clearer the picture became. Silas Blackwood had possessed irrefutable evidence of the Caldwell Corporation's egregious environmental violations. Evidence that, if revealed, would have led to massive fines, public outrage, and potentially criminal charges against key executives. He was on his way to meet a journalist, prepared to expose everything. When he disappeared, the pieces began to click into place. The blunt force trauma, consistent with the struggle, the chemical traces, pointing directly to the Caldwell plant, the deliberate cover-up of the initial investigation, and the unique river eddy, a natural anomaly perhaps enhanced or even manipulated by design. A perfect hidden grave, the intricate web of deceit, spun over 15 years, was slowly unraveling, thread by thread. But Jake knew the hardest part was yet to come: unmasking the perpetrator, the actual killer, especially when shielded by the might of the Caldwell name, would be their greatest challenge yet. Rex, seemingly aware of the escalating stakes, remained by Jake's side, a silent, unwavering shadow. His presence a constant reminder of the long-awaited justice they sought. The atmosphere in Oakhaven grew thick with speculation and unease as the murder investigation into Silas Blackwood intensified. The once unquestionable authority of the Caldwell Corporation began to show cracks under the relentless pressure of Detective Miller and Officer Riley's investigation. The initial round of interviews with Caldwell executives yielded little: a wall of corporate platitudes and carefully worded denials. Robert Caldwell, the younger, ostensibly more approachable face of the corporation, maintained a facade of shocked innocence, offering condolences for Silas's death while subtly attempting to deflect blame onto radical environmentalists. Jake, however, felt a profound unease in Robert Caldwell's presence. There was a coldness in his eyes, a calculated precision in his words that spoke of practiced deception. Rex, too, reacted subtly, a low, almost imperceptible growl in his throat whenever Robert's name was mentioned, or when Jake reviewed photos of him. It wasn't the agitated distress Rex showed near the bridge, but a deep, primal mistrust. The crucial detail came not from a person, but from a persistent, almost maddening absence. The cold case file on Silas Blackwood was remarkably thin, not just in terms of investigation, but in terms of Silas's own possessions. His car was found, his wallet and keys inside, but a vital piece of his equipment was missing: a small, rugged GPS-enabled camera. Which Silas, an avid outdoorsman and a meticulous documentarian of environmental infractions, was known to carry everywhere. This camera wasn't just for taking pictures. It could record video, geotag locations, and had a built-in microphone. It was the perfect tool for an environmental activist gathering evidence. Jake recalled the moment the specialized dive team had recovered Silas's remains. There was no camera on his person, no sign of it in the debris pulled from the eddy. But what if it hadn't been swept away? What if it had been taken, He and Miller theorized that Silas, knowing the danger of confronting a powerful corporation, would have had a contingency plan. He wouldn't have gone to meet a journalist without ensuring his evidence was safe. They began to look for anyone Silas might have entrusted with a backup or a safe deposit. Their breakthrough came when Miller's team interviewed Silas's estranged sister, a reclusive botanist living far from Oakhaven. Distrustful of the initial police investigation, she admitted that Silas had sent her a small, encrypted USB drive several weeks before his disappearance. He told her it contained insurance. She had never looked at it, fearing it would put her in danger, but after the news of the murder, she felt compelled to help. The USB drive was a treasure trove. It contained not just documents and spreadsheets detailing the Caldwell Corporation's illegal waste disposal practices, but also a series of chilling video recordings from Silas's missing camera. The first videos showed routine environmental surveying, documenting illegal dumping into the river. But the last video, dated the night of Silas's disappearance, was the most damning. It was dark, shaky, clearly recorded in haste. The sound of rushing water filled the background, punctuated by heavy footsteps. The video opened with Silas, looking distressed, whispering into the camera about a sudden confrontation. He was near the Oakhaven Bridge. He panned the camera quickly, showing dimly lit figures approaching him from the riverbank, near the precise eddy where his remains were found. One voice, clear despite the darkness and the sound of the river, cut through the night. It was Robert Caldwell's. "You really think you can expose us?" Silas. "You naive fool." Robert's voice snarled, laced with a chilling arrogance. "This river takes more than just secrets." The video then showed a brief, violent struggle. Silas cried out. The camera tumbled, landing in the mud. Still recording. The distinctive belt buckle, now identified on Silas's remains, flashed briefly into view. There was the sound of a heavy thud, a sickening crack, the sound of the blunt force trauma. Then, a splash, followed by the chilling words, clearly audible from Robert Caldwell. "Make sure it stays down. The river takes care of its own. And clean up this mess. Don't leave a trace." The camera then showed a pair of heavy, mud-splattered boots, likely belonging to Robert Caldwell's accomplice, deliberately pushing Silas's body into the unique eddy. The last image on the video was not of Silas, but of a dark, almost unnaturally shaped rock formation being shoved into the water, precisely at the entrance of the eddy, followed by the metallic glint Jake had seen in his own initial underwater camera footage. The rock was clearly being used to ensure the body was pulled into and trapped within the natural vortex, perhaps even to accelerate its decomposition with chemicals, creating the perfect hidden grave. Jake and Miller watched the video in stunned silence. The truth, hidden for 15 years, was finally laid bare. It wasn't just Robert Caldwell. The voice of a second individual, less prominent but clearly complicit, was also audible, giving instructions for the cleanup, likely Arthur Finch, the terrified plant manager. The missing camera, once a ghost in the file, had become the ultimate witness. The river hadn't just given up its secret, it had been holding onto the irrefutable proof of its forced silence, patiently waiting for someone to listen. And Rex, the faithful K9, had been barking the truth from the very beginning. The video from Silas Blackwood's camera was the smoking gun, igniting the cold case into a roaring inferno. Robert Caldwell, the golden boy of Oakhaven, was now unequivocally linked to Silas's murder. Detective Miller, a man usually reserved in his emotions, felt a surge of professional vindication. Jake felt a profound, almost spiritual sense of justice for Silas. And for Rex, whose unwavering intuition had finally been justified, The immediate challenge was securing Robert Caldwell. The Caldwell Corporation had deep roots and powerful connections. A direct arrest, without careful planning, could lead to leaked information, allowing Robert to flee or destroy further evidence. Miller, with Captain Davies's full backing, orchestrated a meticulous strategy. Their first move was to quietly bring in Arthur Finch, the terrified plant manager whose voice was also on the video. Finch, knowing the full weight of the evidence against him and the Caldwells, crumbled almost immediately. He confirmed everything: the illegal dumping, Silas's threats to expose them, and the night of the murder. He confessed that Robert Caldwell had intercepted Silas near the bridge, confronted him, and in a fit of rage, struck him down. Finch had arrived moments later, summoned by Robert, and helped dispose of the body, weighing it down with a heavy, custom-designed concrete block, the very unnatural rock formation Jake had observed in the eddy, to ensure it would be trapped and never resurface. The chemical traces, Finch admitted, were due to Robert's sadistic instruction to spray the body with a potent, corrosive agent from the plant, meant to accelerate decomposition and further obscure the crime. This was the chemical smell Rex had picked up, the lingering stain of injustice Elias Thorne had spoken of. Finch, hoping for a plea deal, provided damning details about the Caldwells' long history of environmental negligence and their pervasive influence over local officials, including key figures in the police department who had ensured Silas's case was buried. The corrupt ex-officer Jake and Miller had interviewed was just one piece of a much larger, insidious network, with Finch's confession and the video evidence. Miller and Jake moved on Robert Caldwell. They obtained a warrant, citing new and compelling evidence. The arrest was executed quietly, away from the public eye, to prevent a media circus and potential interference from the Caldwell family. Robert, despite his initial arrogance and denials, could not stand against the irrefutable evidence of the video and Finch's testimony. His carefully constructed facade shattered, revealing the desperate, cornered killer beneath, but the Caldwell Corporation still wielded immense power. Thomas Caldwell Sr. immediately brought in a team of high-priced lawyers, attempting to discredit the evidence, the witnesses, and even Jake and Rex. They spun narratives of a disgruntled former employee Finch, a fabricated video, and a delusional police officer obsessed with an old legend. The prosecution, led by a sharp, ambitious district attorney, knew they needed more than just the video and Finch's testimony. They needed to showcase the depth of the deceit, the lengths the Caldwells had gone to cover their tracks. This meant confronting the systemic corruption within their own ranks, the complicity of those who had allowed Silas's murder to remain unsolved for so long. Jake found himself testifying not only about Rex's behavior and the discovery of Silas's remains, but also about the subtle pressures he'd felt, the unspoken dismissals of his concerns, the way the system seemed to subtly push back against any questioning of the Caldwells. He spoke eloquently about Rex's uncanny ability to sense the wrongness, the lingering presence of a violent act. Even after 15 years, during one particularly tense moment in court, the defense attorney, a slick, condescending man, tried to mock Jake's reliance on a dog's intuition. "So, Officer Riley," he sneered, "you're telling this esteemed court that your dog solved a murder case that trained human detectives couldn't?" Jake, holding Rex's leash, looked the attorney squarely in the eye. "Yes, sir. He did. Because sometimes, when humans are blind or unwilling to see the truth, an animal's pure instinct and loyalty will lead the way." Rex sensed the injustice, the lingering presence of a man whose life was cruelly taken and whose voice was silenced. He heard the river's silent scream, and he kept barking until someone finally listened. The courtroom fell silent. Even the judge seemed momentarily moved. Rex, sensing the shift, let out a soft, almost imperceptible whine, then looked up at Jake. his eyes reflecting an unspoken understanding. The narrative was clear: a powerful corporation, driven by greed, had silenced an activist, covered up the crime, and then relied on its influence to bury the truth. But a loyal dog, and an officer willing to believe him, had finally brought the long-awaited reckoning. The net was closing in around the Caldwells, and the Oak Haven Bridge, once a site of quiet dread, was now a beacon of unfolding justice. The trial of Robert Caldwell became the most sensational event Oak Haven had witnessed in decades. The courtroom was packed daily, a buzzing hive of reporters, curious townsfolk, and a grim-faced Thomas Caldwell Sr., who watched the proceedings with a stony, defiant expression. The prosecution systematically dismantled the defense's every argument, presenting the compelling evidence piece by piece: the recovered remains, the forensic report detailing the blunt force trauma, and the distinctive chemical traces, Arthur Finch's chilling testimony, and finally, the damning video from Silas Blackwood's camera, which was played to a stunned silence in the courtroom. The defense, however, was relentless. They painted Silas Blackwood as a dangerous extremist, claiming the video was doctored, and trying to portray Arthur Finch as a desperate, lying man seeking a reduced sentence. Their most aggressive attacks were leveled at Jake and Rex, attempting to discredit their methods and impugn Jake's professional integrity. Officer Riley, the defense attorney, Mr. Harrington, pressed during cross-examination, his voice dripping with condescension. You testified that your dog sensed an injustice. Can you explain to the jury how a dog, no matter how well trained, can sense a moral abstract like injustice? Jake, calm and composed, met Harrington's gaze. Rex is a K9 trained to detect specific scents, specific anomalies for 2 years. He reacted to a lingering presence beneath that bridge, a presence that my human senses couldn't immediately identify. It was a chemical signature, a disturbance in the river's natural flow that shouldn't have been there. He didn't sense injustice. He detected the physical evidence of a crime that led us to the injustice. Harrington scoffed. So it was just a smell, then, and a current, not some K9 psychic ability. It was a combination of factors that only Rex could fully process. Jake responded firmly. He was persistent. He refused to let it go, and that persistence, that refusal to accept what seemed normal, led us to Mr. Blackwood's remains. It led us to the truth that was deliberately hidden. The turning point came when the prosecution brought in an independent hydrogeologist, who testified about the unique eddy beneath the Oak Haven Bridge. She explained, with scientific precision, how the peculiar rock formation, combined with the specific current, created a near-perfect trap. She further confirmed that such a rock formation, of that size and composition, was highly unlikely to be natural in that specific part of the riverbed, especially given the existing geological surveys. Her testimony implied deliberate placement. Corroborating Finch's confession about the weighted concrete block used to sink Silas's body and trap it, the prosecution then revealed a final, crucial piece of evidence: bank records showing a series of significant, untraceable cash payments made from a shell corporation linked to Thomas Caldwell Sr., to a retired police official, and several obscure figures in the local planning department around the time of Silas's disappearance. These payments, carefully hidden for 15 years, demonstrated a clear pattern of bribery and cover-up, implicating Thomas Caldwell Sr. himself in the conspiracy to conceal the murder. The web of deceit extended far beyond Robert. The revelation sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Thomas Caldwell Sr., usually unflappable, looked visibly shaken. The defense's arguments began to crumble. The narrative of a powerful family's abuse of influence and their desperate attempts to protect their reputation and illegal activities became painfully clear. During a recess, as Jake stood with Rex outside the courthouse, he saw Elias Thorne observing from a distance. A faint, knowing smile on his face. Elias raised a hand in a small gesture of acknowledgement, and Jake nodded back, a silent understanding passing between them. The river, through its most loyal guardian, was finally speaking its full truth. The final days of the trial were dominated by powerful closing arguments. The prosecution painted a vivid picture of a ruthless corporation, a murdered activist, and a long-orchestrated cover-up finally exposed by the unwavering loyalty of a K-9 and his determined officer. The defense struggled to counter the overwhelming weight of the evidence. The jury deliberated for only 2 days. The tension in the courtroom was palpable when the verdict was finally read. Robert Caldwell was found guilty on all counts, including first-degree murder and obstruction of justice. A collective gasp, then a quiet murmur, swept through the room. Justice, long delayed, was finally being served. Thomas Caldwell Sr., his face ashen, stared blankly ahead, his empire of lies collapsing around him. The Oak Haven Bridge, once a silent monument to a hidden tragedy, was now the symbolic gateway to a hard-won victory for truth and justice. The guilty verdict against Robert Caldwell sent shockwaves far beyond the quiet confines of Oak Haven. It resonated through the state, a stark reminder that even the most powerful could not escape the long arm of the law. The Caldwell Corporation, once unassailable, now faced a barrage of investigations environmental agencies descended upon their plant. Former employees came forward with new testimonies of corruption and intimidation, and a class action lawsuit was immediately filed by the families affected by the company's long history of pollution. But for Jake, the real climax wasn't just the verdict, it was the ripple effect, the unmasking of the systemic corruption that had allowed Silas Blackwood's murder to remain unsolved for so long. The retired police official who had been bribed, along with several others in the local planning and environmental departments, were arrested and charged. The entire structure of quiet complicity that the Caldwells had built over decades began to crumble. The evening after the verdict, Jake sat on his porch. Rex curled contentedly at his feet. The usual Oak Haven sounds of distant traffic and crickets chirping filled the air. He thought about Sarah, his sister, and the cold case that had haunted his own family, while her case remained unsolved. The justice for Silas Blackwood offered a strange, unexpected solace. It was a testament to the idea that some truths, no matter how deeply buried, would eventually surface. His phone rang. It was Detective Miller. "Just got off the phone with the DA's office." "Jake," Miller said, his voice unusually light. "Thomas Caldwell Sr. just confessed, said he couldn't live with the shame. Not after his son went down. He admitted to orchestrating the cover-up, bribing officials, and even helping Robert dispose of Silas's body on the night of the murder. He also confessed to threatening Silas and trying to buy his silence before the fatal confrontation." Jake felt a jolt. Thomas Caldwell Sr. confessing. It was the final, devastating blow to the Caldwell empire. The true collapse of their carefully constructed power. The patriarch, who had once seemed untouchable, had finally broken. "What about Finch?" Jake asked. "His plea deal stands." Miller replied, "His testimony was crucial. He'll get a reduced sentence for his cooperation, but the Caldwells, they're facing the full weight of the law." The conversation drifted to Rex. "That dog of yours, Jake," Miller mused. "He's a legend now. The K-9 who solved a 15-year-old murder. I've never seen anything like it. He saved my career, you know. He saved Silas Blackwood's memory," Jake corrected gently, looking down at Rex, who stirred and nuzzled his hand. "He just needed someone to listen." The next day, a small memorial was held at the Oak Haven Bridge for Silas Blackwood. It was a simple, heartfelt gathering, attended by former environmental colleagues, concerned citizens, and even some of the older townsfolk who had always suspected the truth. Elias Thorne was there, standing quietly by the riverbank, his eyes no longer holding a cryptic sadness, but a serene peace. Jake attended in uniform, with Rex by his side. When it was his turn to speak, he kept it brief. Silas Blackwood was a man who fought for the truth. He died trying to expose a grave injustice. For 15 years, the truth was silent, buried by power and greed. But the Oakhaven River and a very special K9 refused to let that silence last forever. He paused, then looked at Rex. Rex didn't just find a body, he found justice. He taught me the true meaning of loyalty and the importance of listening to what isn't spoken. As Jake finished, a ripple of applause went through the crowd. Rex, sensing the positive energy, let out a soft whine and nudged Jake's hand. For the first time in 2 years, as they stood on the bank overlooking the bridge, Rex didn't show any signs of distress. The bridge no longer represented a hidden horror. It was now a symbol of truth revealed. Later that week, Jake and Rex went on their regular patrol as they approached the Oakhaven Bridge. Jake hesitated, a familiar tension building in his chest. This time, however, it wasn't due to Rex's fear, it was anticipation. He watched Rex carefully. The dog walked with purpose, his tail held high, his nose sniffing the air. He walked right onto the bridge, his paws firm on the asphalt. He didn't hesitate, didn't growl, didn't pull back. He simply walked, confidently, purposefully, across the entire span. Jake felt a lump in his throat. Rex had reclaimed the bridge. The river had given up its secret, and in doing so, it had healed a wound, not just for the town, but for the loyal K9 who had carried its burden for so long. The Oakhaven Bridge, once a barrier of unspoken dread, was now a pathway of triumph, forever linking the unwavering loyalty of a dog to the hard-won victory of justice. The Oakhaven Bridge, once a source of quiet dread, a symbol of unspoken fears and buried truths, was transformed. It was no longer the place where Rex had stubbornly planted his paws, refusing to budge. Instead, it became a testament to his unwavering loyalty, a monument to the perseverance of truth, and a beacon of justice in a town that had long lived with its own shadows. In the weeks and months that followed, life in Oakhaven slowly began to realign. The Caldwell Corporation, stripped of its leadership and facing immense legal and financial repercussions, began a slow, painful process of dissolution. The plant, once a symbol of economic power, became a stark reminder of unchecked greed. New environmental regulations were swiftly enacted, championed by a revitalized town council determined to prevent another such injustice. Officer Jake, Riley, and Rex became local heroes, their story spreading far beyond Oakhaven. They were featured in national news, hailed as an extraordinary example of the K9 handler bond and the unexpected ways in which truth can surface. Jake, initially uncomfortable with the spotlight, used the platform to advocate for cold case re-examinations, particularly those involving environmental crimes and powerful corporate interests. He became a proponent for trusting intuition, for looking beyond the official narrative, and for listening to the silent voices that often held the most profound truths. Rex, oblivious to his newfound fame, remained the same steadfast, loving partner. His aversion to the bridge was entirely gone. He would cross it daily with Jake during patrols, often pausing at the precise spot where Silas Blackwood's remains had been found. He would look down at the now clear, flowing water, a sense of peace radiating from him. Before continuing his duties, it was as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his canine spirit. A long-held duty finally fulfilled, Elias Thorne continued his quiet vigil by the river, his eyes now holding a profound serenity. He and Jake developed a quiet friendship, sharing knowing glances and occasional conversations about the river's ever-changing moods. Elias would often say, "The river gives, and the river takes, but sometimes with a little help." It gives back what was wrongfully taken. He always looked at Rex when he said it. Jake's own personal burden. The unresolved disappearance of his sister Sarah still lingered. But the experience with Silas Blackwood's case gave him a renewed sense of hope. He understood now that time, though it might obscure, did not always erase. He realized that the unwavering spirit of those who sought truth, whether human or canine, could eventually break through even the most entrenched walls of silence. He found himself looking at old maps of the wilderness where Sarah had vanished, seeing not just trees and trails, but potential secrets, waiting for someone to listen. The Oakhaven Bridge was repainted, its old stone arches gleaming with a fresh coat of paint. Locals no longer hurried across it with averted gazes. Instead, they would often pause, perhaps patting a passing dog, and look at the river below, knowing that it had finally given up its secret, thanks to the persistence of a loyal canine. The bridge became a symbol of renewal, a reminder that even in the darkest depths, truth and justice could rise to the surface. Guided by the purest of hearts, Jake and Rex continued their patrols. A formidable team. Their bond forged not just in duty, but in shared purpose and an extraordinary journey into the heart of a long-buried mystery. Their story echoed a timeless message that some connections transcend words, that loyalty knows no bounds, and that even the smallest, most unexpected voices can lead to the greatest revelations.